Okay, I'm Casey from Stanford GSB. This project is looking at political party primaries. So how political parties choose candidates who run in the general election. So on the research side, it's myself, Rachel Glenister, Nicolo Marigi, and Abubakar Kamara. And we had a bunch of partners in Sierra Leone to get this done. So we got a lot of early support from the Political Parties Registration Commission, the National Electoral Commission, but really the heavy lifting in terms of implementation was done by Search for Common Ground, which is a civil society media partner, and the two major political parties themselves. So the All People's Congress, the APC, and the Sierra Leone People's Party. So what we're going to be looking at is we're going to look at political party primaries in the context of parliamentary elections. So you can think about this in the US, this is akin to congressional races. So for the US House of Representatives, so there's 132 small geographic districts around the country. Each one elects one parliamentarian or MP. So it's first past the post, whoever gets the most votes wins, and that person then represents the local people in parliament. So that's the context. Why this is interesting in terms of looking at the primaries is that because political parties have regional geographic strongholds, and this is true not just in Sierra Leone, but in most countries, you tend to have a lot of these little districts are very uncompetitive because they're very heavily lopsided towards one political party or the other. So when you come to the general election, it's as if almost any candidate that the locally dominant party puts forward is basically guaranteed to win. And what this means is that the competition that matters is not the general election competition, but it's the internal primary competition of the advantaged party. Right? So that's the competition that is going to generate electoral accountability incentives, right? So if you're guaranteed to win the general election, it's not the general election voters who are creating your accountability incentives to perform well. It's the within party competition where your party needs to be rewarding, good performance and punishing bad performance for democracy to have these strong incentives for performance. So when that raises a question of how do these primaries work? Because you can think about internal competition in the primary as a substitute for a lack of competition in the general election. But the question is, are they very competitive and how does it work? So these are generic problems around the world, but if you take these issues into poor countries, low-income countries, the parties tend to have a lot fewer resources, right? And they also tend to be more informal about how they select their candidates. There's not a lot of transparency on how this works. It's not clear what is the criteria that the political parties use to choose amongst aspirants, amongst the people that want to be candidates. And it's really not clear whether political parties are choosing characteristics that are the same things that the voters themselves would value, right? And so in general, in informal process of informal primaries, party elites have really outsized influence over picking the candidates, and ordinary voters, rank and file party members, don't have much of a voice. So this kind of immediately creates tensions and problems around representation. So if party leaders like candidates that are different than the ones voters like, we have a problem with representation. And again, accountability. Who are these candidates accountable to? Are they accountable to the local people from the general election? No, they're accountable to this small number of party bosses that have the ability to give them the symbol and take that symbol away during the next election. Okay, so this is in Sierra Leone. So what does politics look like in Sierra Leone? So just to summarize the way politics are organized, there are the two largest ethnic groups are each affiliated with one of the two major political parties. These are long-standing affiliations that started right shortly after independence in 1961. So I have on this map, all I've done is I've shaded the parliamentary constituencies by the ethnic composition that favors one party over the other. So in the north, the red, those are the Timni and affiliated ethnic groups who have been historical supporters of the All People's Congress. I'm shading them red because their party symbol is the red rising sun. So the darker the red, the heavier the skew of the population towards these APC affiliated ethnic groups. I did the same thing in the south, so now I'm shading it by, again, ethnic composition. These are now the Mende and affiliated ethnic groups who are long-term supporters of the Sierra Leone People's Party. It's green because their symbol is the palm tree. right? So what you can see, just based on ethnicity, you've got two big party strongholds. There are some competitive areas, particularly in the east and the west, but a lot of the country is very heavily biased from an ethnic perspective towards one party or another. So the thing to keep in mind, the only ingredient I put into this map is ethnicity. So now this map shows you which party won that parliamentary seat. This is from a previous election. But what you're seeing is essentially all these red-leaning districts delivered the red party. All of these green-leaning districts delivered the green party, right? And a lot of these are landslide elections, like 80-20 vote shares. And so now we're a little bit concerned. Okay, well, who chose the 132 candidates, right? Because a lot of the 132 candidates win in a landslide. This is not just something bizarre about ethnicity in Sierra Leone. So there's a study by Hirano and Snyder looking at the U.S. congressional races over the last 70 years. And they count how many of those races were decided by less than 15 percentage points. So that's their bar for being relatively competitive. So over 70 years across all House districts, only 44% of races were actually competitive. Right? So this is a kind of a generic problem with party strongholds. And so at the end of the day, when you get to the general election, the voters in Sierra Leone are perfectly enfranchised on paper. These are very well-run elections. They're free and fair. Turnout is massive. People's votes are being counted. There's a lot of international monitoring. But they're kind of de facto irrelevant, right? Because the candidate who the party chose is basically guaranteed to win. So then we come back again. How are those candidates chosen? And so the two major political parties are a little bit different in how they work. So the APC tends to be very centralized and very hierarchical. They've written into their party constitution that they reserve the right to elect or select candidates for all elections and all levels of office. In practice, that means that a very small number of the most central, highest level party bosses are responsible for picking 132 candidates. The party that was in opposition at the time, the SLPP, is more decentralized. They have a more grassroots structure. So, the constituency team recommends to the district, to the region, to the national headquarters. But even the smallest level, you have only 3 people deciding the candidate on behalf of 40,000 residents. So what is true about both parties is there's very little direct participation of voters in selecting candidates. And that's where we're getting up these issues. Okay, well, what are parties maximizing when they choose these candidates? And how does that align with what voters would maximize if they could have a direct say? So that's the motivation. The research question is then, kind of falls naturally from this. So what we're looking at is, does the introduction of more democratic primary selection methods enhance representation? Does it alter candidate selection? And ultimately, will it affect the performance of elected MPs? So how did we do this? Well, this is a randomized control trial, obviously. And the treatment, so we're randomizing across constituency, so we're randomizing across races. So in the control group, it's just politics as usual. Political parties pick their candidates however they've been picking them. But in the treatment group, there's 2 things that happen. There is a party convention at the constituency level, so at the level of this little jurisdiction. It's in the town hall. All of the aspirants, all the people who want to be the candidate assemble. They're all up on stage. They're presenting their qualifications to party leadership who are there in person. They can also, the aspirants bring their supporters, so you have a lot of local people, rank and file party members. And it's an informative debate. So Search for Common Ground, the civil society group, is there to moderate the debates. You can think about the role that CNN plays in presidential primaries in the U.S. To keep it civil, to keep it merit-based, to keep it based on qualifications. The conventions are broadcast live on the radio, then they're rebroadcast multiple times so that local people in the constituency are also learning about these aspirants. And you can see why parties like this, because it's actually, logistically, it's pretty difficult to pick 132 candidates all around the country, and it's a pretty short amount of time that they have to actually do this. So this is sort of an efficient way to bring everybody together, to learn a lot about the aspirants and to vet them. They also learn a lot about how popular they are just by seeing people's reactions in the town hall. The second ingredient is a large-scale representative polling of voters. So this is representative at the level of the constituency. So we're randomly sampling from the official log of registered voters so that we have a representative sample of that constituency that this person is going to represent. We compile a one-page report that is just ranking these aspirants by their vote shares amongst the local people. We give this to the party leaders. It says, here's the vote shares of the aspirants in this population in general, but also separately for those that self-declare as supporters of your party. So we worked with the APC and SLPP separately. So what they did, they gave us a list. There's 132 constituencies. We said pick around 50 of these where you'd be willing to experiment with this. And then we randomized for each party. Just budget reasons, we have 23 treated and 23 control per party. So our total sample is 92. In terms of data collection, we surveyed voters, aspirants, and party leaders both before and after these conventions happened. So in the control group, nothing is happening in terms of politics, but the data collection is exactly identical across treatment and control. So the link up, we actually, Andy mentioned, we exchanged survey instruments with Andy's team, which is very helpful. Okay, so this is what it looked like. So in the treatment, there's advance announcement that this is happening, although only one of the two parties actually announced this in advance. So you can look at, does this change the aspirant pool for that party, and particularly do they get more people to choose from? Then there's the convention, the radio broadcast, and the voter report. So we are surveying voters, aspirants, and party leaders at both treated and controlled constituencies before the convention. And then these surveys happen after the convention, and the V2 survey, that's where we get the source of data for the voter report. And that is done a few days after that. And then we can look at, the outcomes that we care about are representation, candidate selection, and eventually MP performance. So I have the first result on representation for you now. So we have a very large positive impact on representation, which is just the probability that the person that local people like is the one that got the party symbol to compete in the general election, which kind of mechanically, given that a lot of these are strongholds, is that person actually became the elected MP. So for both the ruling party and the opposition party, there's like a strong uptick. So the opposition in particular, and the controls, only 1 in 4 times was the candidate, the same person that the local people wanted. That goes up to 61%. If you put in all our fixed effects for how we did the randomization, on average, we've isolated about a 35 percentage point increase in representation. So that's what we have so far. Going forward, we're going to look at selection. So can we see any observable difference between the candidates who come out of this more democratic process versus the status quo? We're going to try to characterize what is the conflict, if anything, between party elite preferences over these aspirants, because we asked them, like Andy's survey, like everything you could possibly ask about aspirants and all these behavioral measures. So, what is it that party leaders like, and what is it that local people like, and is there actually a tension there? And then, eventually we'll be looking at, once these guys get in office and have a chance to do some work, do they behave differently? So even if they look similar on paper, do they behave in office more aligned with being downwardly accountable to those 40,000 people they represent, as opposed to sort of upward accountability towards this handful of party elites in the capital? So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
I have a question there.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about what goes on in the conventions? I can imagine one way to do this where you get really, really good candidates out of it, and one way to get where you actually negatively select on candidates. So what are they introducing the candidates to the people?
Do you mean do the party leaders cast the candidates in an unfavorable light, or?
I mean, just how are they debating one another? Or
They are debating. So as I mentioned, our civil society partner, we've actually worked with them on debates between candidates from different parties. So they're doing something sort of similar. So they're moderating it. So people are presenting their qualifications, like why they would be a good MP and sort of why they actually represent local interests. But then they are debating each other on key policy issues. But search, kind of like CNN, is really there to make sure that this is civil, is oriented towards merit and qualifications. In terms of maybe some people, we did have people monitoring and writing down what happened. And one of the things that we were asking is, are any of the aspirants sort of being cast in a negative light, either by the party leaders or, search is very, they're very neutral. But so just, was anybody kind of getting an unfair shake is one of the things that we have process data on. I don't think that ended up in practice being a big problem. Yeah.
I think this is kind of what you're getting at too. Are you able to see if the meetings shape preferences for candidates? So when you're looking at the outcome and selection of candidates, is that the pre that you're looking at, or that's
Oh, so this is good. So we can actually, if I could just pull the slide back, we can do a whole, I mean, there's so many different things that we're interested in doing. So one of the things we can do is we can look at learning, for example, party leaders from before or after the convention. What do they actually know about their aspirants, which is, in the controls, like they might not actually be very well informed, so we can see what do party leaders learn. We're asking them to rank all the aspirants before and after, so we can see, do they learn something that actually changes their preference ranking over the aspirants, and what are the characteristics that are going up and going down. All the same thing with voters. We incentivize some voters to listen to this on radio. A lot of people heard it anyway, because we played it several times, so we can see are voters changing their preferences when they learn about these candidates, what's going up, what's going down. Yeah.
So it's related to that, what's your sense of what the party leaders are getting out of it? Because they're kind of relinquishing some degree of control, and you mentioned that they nominated the places where they're willing to experiment. So
Exactly.
What do those places look like relative to the others? And
Yeah,
what are you
yeah.
talking about? Is it just, okay, we're getting free publicity on the radio, and so it's worth it in a place where we're not too worried about who takes?
Yeah, so that's super cool, and I didn't mention this. So one of the things that's on kind of on the to-do list is to look at not really compliance, but where they selected in. So they had a lot of leeway. There's 132 constituencies, and they could pare that down to 50 where they're willing to experiment. So one of the things we plan on doing is what are the characteristics of those constituencies? Are they going for strongholds, weak holds, the marginal races? Are they avoiding incumbents who are running for re-election? So we plan to do that. We also had three places refused to participate. So there's only 3, so you can't learn a whole lot, but we can say what is it seems to be going on in those 3 places that it was unacceptable to do this. I think so. The parties were absolutely not willing to totally let go of all their discretion. It's in their constitution that they can select, as opposed to elect whenever they want to. So, I was really nervous we were not going to have any effect on representation, which would have kind of, really kind of wasted a lot of EDI money. But we did. So, it's not perfect. It's very far from perfect compliance. You're getting up to around, 60, 65%. So 100 would be following these reports. And so we can look at where are they willing to go with the local people's choice, and where do they override that choice, and for what types of aspirants / candidates. Yeah, I think those are going to be really cool questions.
So these locations were not randomly selected?
They were randomly selected. No, the 3 where they didn't comply with treatment. So 46 randomly assigned to treatment, 46 randomly assigned to control. 3 of the constituencies assigned to treatment refused to have a convention in polling, refused to change the primary.
So I thought you said that they did not allow primaries to happen everywhere.
They selected some places to experiment, and then within those,
Okay.
Right. So everywhere has a primary. What the exogenous variation is it's introducing these more democratic processes to the primary. Both parties came up with 132 candidates at the end of the day, right? So there's a candidate everywhere. It's just in 43 places this was 46 places this was a more democratic process.